So lovely to be here with you again this evening. I think I was last here just before Christmas and I see so many new faces. So to those of you who don't know me, my name is Kim. I am a youth worker in Warrington, in Latchford. I work for a Christian charity called Warrington Youth for Christ. We do a lot of work with teenagers in the area. We go into schools, we run youth clubs and community projects and stuff like that. And we run a youth club here. And so that's my connection with Kent Street, and just to say hello. It's so lovely to be with you this evening, and it's been really nice, and especially here on Pentecost Sunday as well. I understand last time I was here you were getting ready for your year of evangelism, and I like your sign as well, 2021, the year of evangelism. And I remember when I first applied for my job at Youth for Christ, the job title, it wasn't youth worker, it was youth evangelist. And I found that quite daunting. So when I heard that you're having a focus on evangelism this year, I was just so encouraged and excited. At Youth for Christ, we talk and think about evangelism a lot. And, what does evangelism mean? I feel like it's a word that we never say in life other than in church. And so what does this word mean for us? At Youth for Christ, our kind of tagline, mission statement is we're about seeing young people's lives changed by Jesus. That's what we are about. And sometimes I'm quite a practical person. Like I like to see the physical outworking of something. And so often I think, right, what does that actually mean? What part do I have to play in this? As I go about my day to day, going into school, going, to youth clubs at home with my friends, like what does that actually mean? Because I'm sure that's as you have this focus this year at Kent Street, that might be what you're thinking about. What does this actually mean for us as a church to have this focus on evangelism? And we want to be evangelists. Like what does that look like for us day to day? And this left me thinking about, well, what do I think evangelism is? And often we think of evangelism as preaching the gospel, sharing the gospel. And that left me sometimes with a little bit of a feeling that if I'm talking about God, I'm doing evangelism. It's this quite narrow thing. And then as I do everything else, that's something else. I'll go about my life, do other things. And then if I find an opportunity to talk about God, then I'm evangelizing in this kind of little narrow space. But I feel like God's been showing me a lot about evangelism and maybe rejigging my perspective a little bit. And he kind of showed me three things that evangelism, or three ways that he's kind of getting me to think about evangelism. And the first one being in the way that we live, living out this gospel message. And that could be like tonight, that we've met together as church. We've met together as family. Lots of different people from different backgrounds, different experiences, people that very likely, if it weren't for church and it weren't for the gospel, would never cross paths. We would just go about our lives, maybe bump into each other at the shops or on the bus or whatever it might be. But because of the gospel, because of the cross of Jesus that we've just heard about, we are all together in this room this evening as family, whether we know each other's names or not, whether we've met before or not, so many new faces, and that's just such a wonderful thing, the way we're living out this gospel. By loving each other, caring for each other, having a genuine concern for the lives of each other and the lives of the community out of the church as well. It's about living out the gospel and thinking that question, well, what would Jesus actually do in this situation? Not necessarily what would Jesus say, but what would Jesus do to show his care? And that's one way I think of evangelism, living it out. The second way, and most of this talk, by the way, is going to be focused on the third way. But the second way is that sharing the gospel message verbally, taking those opportunities to share with people who Jesus is and what he's done. It says in Romans 10, how can people believe in someone they've never heard of? Basically, how can people believe in Jesus if they've never heard of him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? How can they believe in someone they've never heard of, and how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? It says, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. And it's about looking for those opportunities that we've got to share with people who Jesus is, what the cross meant, what his resurrection means, what the gospel means. But the third way, which I'm mostly focusing on this evening, and it's a way that I've really been just trying to develop in my own life recently as well, is our personal testimonies. And I say testimonies plural, Often when someone says, I want to share my testimony, they mean the story of how I became a Christian, the story of my life and the moment at which I decided to become a Christian. But I think of testimonies as just the general question, why is the gospel good news to me? Not just years ago when I became a Christian or whatever it might be, but this week. Why is the gospel being good news to me this week? What is it about who Jesus is and who God is that is good news to me? It could be even just the fact, as Debbie said, an experience of the Holy Spirit this evening at 7 o'clock on a random rainy May day. We can gather in this room and experience the presence of the God who created the whole universe is here with us. That is good news. And that is every single person in this room has got a testimony of how that has impacted us in some way this evening. And that is such a powerful tool in every single person's evangelism toolbox, if you will. You're going to have people in your life who, whether it's brothers, sisters, friends, co-workers, neighbours, children, grandchildren, who maybe aren't very interested in God at the moment, but they are interested in you. They might not care much about God, but they do care about you. They care about who you are, at what interests you, what you think about things, what your life experiences are. And so I've really been trying to practice recently, and I'd really encourage you to as well, is to reflect for yourself, why is the gospel good news to me? And how would I share that with someone who has no idea what the gospel is? Someone who doesn't understand, sometimes we get a bit stuck in the church, don't we, of churchiness, jargon. How would I explain why the gospel is good news to me, to someone who might be interested in me and my life? And so that did get me thinking that I know quite a few people in this room fairly well, and I've never actually shared with you, personally for me, why the gospel has been good news to me, what my testimonies are. And so I was brought up in a Christian home in St Helens. Sorry for any rugby fans, I am from St Helens. And I was brought up, my mum was a Christian, she was very supportive. She would read the Bible with me and my older brother, and we'd go to church. I wouldn't say I think back to my experience of church as a small child and thought it was hugely fun. I kind of thought of it as something I do. But God was very real to me, and my faith was very real. But as I got a bit older, I had some very bad experiences in church as a teenager, and so that left me feeling very bitter about church. So all through my teenage years, I would identify as a Christian. I'd say that God is real and that I have an active faith, but it was also a very private thing, and it was not something you would not have got me in a church. That just would not have happened throughout my teenage years, aside from a wedding or a funeral or something like that. But the idea of organised Christianity was not for me. So I got to 18, I went to university in Salford, and I remember my mum saying to me, Kim, universities have these clubs called Christian unions, and it's just kind of Christians on campus can get together and be friends. And she said, why don't you give it a go? And I said, no, thank you, was my answer. But she'd mentioned it, and she'd looked into where it was, and so I thought, I'll go once. It was on a Monday night. So I went along, and I remember it was in, I think, like room 19 or something of the Students' Union. But I didn't know where that was. And so I went to the Students' Union reception. I said, do you know where room 19 is? And next thing, there were two lads that arrived at the same time as me and said, we're looking for room 19 as well. And I thought, oh no, I've met people now. That's not good. And they turned to me and said, what club are you going to? And I thought, at that moment, I didn't even realise that I was embarrassed about being a Christian until that moment when I realised I do not want to tell these people where I'm going. So I just said, just a club. And they said, well, what club? I just said, a students' club. So they said, well, we're going to the Christian Union. So I was like, oh, okay, we're going to the same place. So the three of us had a very long, awkward walk to room 19, where I had decided I just didn't want to be here anymore. This was not what I signed up for. I went along to the Christian Union, and everyone was very friendly, but I didn't really like it. Still just very bitter about churchy things. But sadly, I'd already met these two lads now. One of them was called Josh, another one called Alex, and at the time, I thought this was very sad news, but Alex was on the same course as me. So every time he saw me in university, he would say, Kim, when are you coming back to the Christian Union? I thought, oh, just leave me alone. No, Alex is great. But every time I saw him, he would ask me when I'm going back to the Christian Union, until got to the end of my first year. I wasn't enjoying university. I was ready to drop out, and I bumped into him again, and he invited me again. And this time I went, and I was obviously just in a much different place, and I really, made some friends there, and I really got to know people, and it was a really big turning point for me in terms of kind of going to Christian Union, deciding to stay at university, and I was still working out my faith. And there was one point that this other lad, Josh, said to me, "So Kim, how did you become a Christian?" And I didn't even realise this was what was going on in my head until it came out of my mouth. And I said to him, to be honest, I don't really know if I would be a Christian if it weren't for the fact that I've always been a Christian. And as soon as it came out of my mouth, and he looked a bit shocked, and I thought to myself, wow, I didn't even know that was what I thought. And I thought to myself, I'm 18 now. Surely there's got to be a better reason to be a Christian than just that. Surely there's more to it than that. And so that made me just really question and really think, right, I'm going to look into this for myself, because I want to be all in or all out. That's not a good enough reason to follow Jesus, is just because, well, I've always done it, so I'll carry on. And so I looked into these big questions. I got really engrossed in looking at, how do I actually know that Jesus was a real person? I had no idea. People had just told me he was, and so I went through life believing he was. How do I really know that that science hasn't just disproved God? Again, I hadn't looked into it, I just took it. How do I really know that Jesus rose from the dead? And so I decided to look into all these questions, and specifically that last one, how do I know that Jesus rose from the dead? And long story short, I was utterly convinced by what I'd looked into. And that completely changed everything for me. The idea that now Jesus wasn't just this name, a kind of an airy-fairy figure that I'd heard about and that hopefully listened when I prayed. But Jesus was this man who walked on the earth and lived a life like us, and who was God, but he was like me, and he was like lived this life. And not only that, but he did nothing wrong, and yet took on the punishment for all the sins that I'd committed, so that I could have a fresh start and a new life. And believing that that was true, and looking into it and just being so convinced by it, changed everything for me. And that was the point at which I could say, wow, this gospel is good news for me. This gospel is real. I don't know, has anyone watched, heard about the series The Chosen that's been out over the last few years? That someone's developed a series on the life of Jesus. And, watching that now, and not just believing it's a kind of a story that some people believe, but actually this man was a real man, and he came to save you and me, just absolutely transformed everything for me in my life. And so you might be thinking, well, why is Kim, that's lovely, but why is Kim telling me about that? Well, fast forward to last week, and I'd been asked to help out with an RE lesson in the school that I work in. And they'd said, we're doing a lesson on salvation. I don't really want the textbook answer, the doctrine answer to salvation. The RE teacher said, I'm kind of doing that already. Can you just come and share about what difference it actually makes to someone who's a Christian? And I'd found this amazing video from the Alpha course of a man called Shane Taylor, who had been imprisoned for 2 attempted murders. And while he was in prison, he'd gone on an Alpha course and overnight was completely transformed by Jesus. And he now goes into prisons and runs Alpha courses himself. And I had, shared that story. I'd shown his testimony on a video, and it did leave me a little bit insecure about my testimony. I thought, well, mine doesn't sound half as dramatic and interesting as that. And yet, I believe that our salvation is exactly the same. And so it left me with this question, well, what do I believe I have been saved from? What have I been saved from? Why is the gospel good news to me? It made me think about how God brought me into a knowledge of himself, even despite the bitterness and hurts and the way I felt about church. He brought a lot of healing to that situation, because that's what he does. And more recently, the gospel is good news to me because I found myself in lots of situations that I feel completely ill-equipped to deal with. Has anyone else felt like that recently? Even if just in the last year you're in a lot of situations and you think, wow, I've got to do something here, and I have no idea what to do, no idea what to say. And Particularly, in youth work, I might look back and say, oh, if I got this degree, or if I studied this instead, or if I'd gone and got this qualification, or, this, whatever it might be, this training, then I'd be able to deal with this now. But I've not. And so I've now got to try and deal with a situation I feel completely ill-equipped to deal with. And it made me realize what a blessing that can be. Because we were praying about some of these situations at Youth for Christ, and I was led to Psalm 146, which I was just going to read to you, if I can find my page. Psalm 146 says this: "Praise the Lord, O my soul. I will praise the Lord all of my life." Then it says, "Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save." And I read that as, do not put your trust in worldly things, in fancy degrees or training or worldly wisdom. Don't put your trust in all of those things. They are mortal, they are of this world, they cannot save. It says, when their spirit departs, they return to the ground, and on that day their very plans come to nothing. But blessed is the one whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them, the Lord who remains faithful forever. And that just made me realize how blessed we are to be in those situations where we say, literally, my only hope is God. I've got nothing else to bring to this situation. I feel completely ill-equipped. And I know those situations can be really, really scary. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I jump for joy when I'm in those situations. It takes a bit of a mind shift to say, okay, I'd love to have these amazing qualifications and skills and talents now. But what a blessing it is that God's word said, blessed are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God. And I just share that with you because that is why the gospel has been good news to me these last few weeks. And so I'd encourage you to ask yourself, why has the gospel been good news to you? Not just in your whole life, in your, from you were born up until now, but even just in the last few weeks. How has the gospel been good news to you? You might be sat there thinking, it's not really. Can't really think of any ways, or I'm still wrestling with, I don't really know what I think. I don't really know what I believe. I don't really know if Jesus is real, and I'm still wrestling with that, wrestling with how it can be good news. If that's you, I would just assure you that you are in the right place and that your questions are so important. Like, it's okay to have those questions. I had those questions, and having a space to ask them and explore them completely changed my life. Completely changed my life. And also to ask them of God, to say, God, why are you good news for me? How can you be good news for me? And to explore and to listen and to seek him. Such an important and powerful thing to do. And for others of you who, can think of ways in which that the gospel has been good news for you these last few weeks, what are they? And next time someone shows an interest in you in your life, rather than just saying, yeah, I'm fine, how are you? Which is what I do every single time someone asks me how I am. In our very British way, isn't it? How are you? Fine? You? Fine. Carry on. But next time someone shows a genuine interest in you, how are you? How's your week been? What have you been up to? Maybe think of a way that you could share how the gospel has been good news to you this week. And it doesn't have to be a huge, we're starting at creation and we're going right through to Revelation. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be a really simple way that you've felt that God has been with you. A really simple, something that you've taken from church. When you're doing whatever you are doing tomorrow and someone says, how are things at the weekend? How's church been good news to you? How's the gospel been a good news to you? How has an answered prayer been good news to you? Just those people who show an interest. They might not be interested in God yet, but they're definitely interested in you. And so maybe just take some time to reflect on the ways in which the gospel is good news to you. And that is something that's really completely transformed my view of evangelism, and I hope that helps you as well. But it's been so lovely to be with you this evening. I'm around at the end of the service if you want to chat or ask any questions, but lovely to see you. Thank you. Thanks.